All right, let's find out more about the this first meeting of the Board of Peace that took place at the Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C. today. Joining me now to discuss this and more is former Pentagon official Dr. Michael Rubin, who is now Director of Policy Analysis at the Middle East Forum. He is also a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he specializes in Middle Eastern countries, particularly Iran and Turkey. Dr. Rubin, welcome back. Always good to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tony.
All right, first off, your take on today's first meeting of the Board of Peace.
Look, what I'm most worried about is that Donald Trump isn't one to let a little bit of substance get in the way of a good show. And it's all well and good to gather everyone together and talk about how much money has been raised. But the elephant in the room is whether or not Hamas will disarm. There's been plenty of construction in Gaza in the past, but the failure of Hamas to disarm, the failure of the Palestinians in Gaza to eschew that terrorist ideology has ultimately led to that destruction repeatedly. So we need to get the disarmament of Hamas, and we need to address the ideology which fuels it.
All right, let's talk about that elephant in the room. That elephant is also a red line for Israel. Hamas has to disarm and has to go, according to Israel, and rightfully so.
Well, it's front and center in the agreement that led to the ceasefire, to this 20-some-odd point plan. But right out of Hamas's playbook, right out of Iran's playbook, is this notion that you can agree to a ceasefire and then try to change the terms. The question is whether President Trump is going to let Hamas get away with this at this point of time, whether he's so desperate for this ribbon cutting on this development in Gaza that he's going to let these difficult questions fall by the wayside.
But Israel can't allow this to be swept under the rug. I mean, I know that we have this close relationship with Israel and America, and the Israeli administration has been very, very careful not to offend the U.S. administration because Donald Trump has been one of the greatest partners that they've had. But the reality is October the 7th is still fresh in their minds. They cannot allow Hamas to stay there armed just to prepare for another attack.
You're absolutely right. Israel feels that it's walking a diplomatic tightrope, but they're walking a diplomatic tightrope over issues that pose an existential threat. Now, President Donald Trump, of course, is also a big fan of Turkey. He's invited Turkey to be part of this reconstruction in Gaza. And what did Turkey do over this past week? They opened a mosque in Gaza that's named after Abdullah Azzam, who was the professor, the mentor of Osama bin Laden. It almost seems like President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey is seeing how much he can get away with because he believes that he has Donald Trump in his pocket.
Well, and you also have Qatar, they're members of this Board of Peace, and they have been a place of safe harbor for Hamas.
You know, I call it the axis of Ikhwan. Ikhwan, of course, being the Arabic term for the Muslim Brotherhood. You have Turkey, you have Qatar, and increasingly you have Saudi Arabia, who are supporting these Muslim Brotherhood groups. And of course, Hamas is a Muslim Brotherhood offshoot.
So, Dr. Rubin, how does Iran and the current situation there factor into Gaza and the Board of Peace and how Israel is doing this delicate dance with the United States?
Look, if what we talked about before was the elephant in the room, this is the hippopotamus in the room. And the fact of the matter is, throughout the region, everyone is waiting to see what happens with Iran. It seems that President Donald Trump has given the Iranians about 10 days to decide what exactly they want. Now, we're not clear exactly what the United States is seeking to target inside Iran, although the American demands appear to be not only get rid of the nuclear program, but get rid of the ballistic missiles, get rid of all these proxies. Now, just about 2 weeks ago, I came back from Baghdad, and in Baghdad, where they're trying to form a government, all the pro-Iranian factions and the anti-Iranian factions were basically spinning their wheels, waiting to see what would happen with Iran, because if the Iranian government is eliminated, then Iraq is going to choose a very different sort of government. And I could imagine the same sort of dynamics are going on in the Gaza Strip. Hamas really isn't anything without the Iranian and increasingly Turkish sponsorship. What many people in Gaza seem to want is a return to the clan-based, the tribal-based leadership, which tends to be a lot more moderate and put their own constituents first.
So I would think that Turkey, President Erdogan, is actually hoping that maybe the United States take out Iran, so that they can then have he can have a better shot at being the leader in the region for the Islamic world.
I think you're absolutely right, Tony. And you know what? What Saudi Arabia was to radicalism in the late 20th century, Turkey is to radicalism now. And Turkey, under Recep Tayyip Erdogan, has an ideological agenda, which is the spread of Islamism. They supported behind the scenes the growth of the Islamic State. Erdogan not only wants to be a new Ottoman Sultan, he wants to be a caliph. And when you hear Turkish rhetoric, they say, look, we've always had a caliphate. It's only really the last 100 years we haven't. That's an anomaly. That's not the rule. And President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is it. It's a very, very dangerous situation. And where I tend to be consistently critical of Donald Trump, Steve Witkoff, and their team is when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you're a real estate developer, everything looks like an opportunity for real estate development. But if they don't understand the ideology at play within the region, that it's not all about the lack of shiny buildings or resorts, there's something more in play, they're fundamentally going to miss one of the big chances for stability in the region.
We just have a little over a minute left, Dr. Rubin. I like your parallel to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia really exporting a lot of radical Wahhabi Islam, but I kind of see Saudi Arabia and is more of a frat party gone bad. Erdogan is much different. I think he is more dangerous. We thought Saudi was bad. I think an empowered Turkey is even more dangerous.
I think you're absolutely right. Now, I used to live in Iran. One of the things people don't get right about Iran often is they think it's a Shiite power, but from an Iranian perspective, they're just an Islamic power and they're trying to bring everyone else into play. Turkey is the same way. The last point I'll make very quickly is Turkey's own statistics from their own interior ministry show that since Recep Tayyip Erdogan came to power, the murder rate of women inside Turkey has increased 1,400%, and that's because of the sense of impunity that religious conservatives have under his regime.
Dr. Rubin, I'm always sad to say this, we're out of time. Always enjoyed talking to you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony.